There is a moment, one specific, unremarkable moment on an ordinary Thursday afternoon that divided the 20th century in two. A man named Harry Truman was sitting in a congressional hideaway on Capitol Hill. He was having a drink with some aides. Someone was probably telling a joke. Outside, it was a mild April day. The war in Europe was almost over. The war in the Pacific was grinding forward. And Harry Truman, the Vice President of the United States for exactly 82 days, was doing what he usually did in the afternoons, existing at the edges of power. Watching, waiting, not being told anything important. Then a phone rang. He was told to come to the White House immediately. Not why, just come now. He arrived within minutes. He was taken upstairs. Eleanor Roosevelt was there, FDR's wife, a woman who had spent 12 years living inside the most consequential presidency in American history. She walked toward him. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Harry," she said, "the president is dead." Truman stood very still for a moment. Then he asked, and this is the part that tells you everything about who Harry Truman was. He asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Eleanor Roosevelt looked at him. "Is there anything we can do for you?" she said. "You are the one in trouble now." She was right. She had no idea how right she was. Harry Truman would not sleep much that night. He would be sworn in within the hour. He would sit with the cabinet. He would receive the military briefings, the chain of command protocols, the diplomatic cables piling up from 12 directions at once. But there was one briefing he would not receive that night. One secret that nobody brought to his attention. One project, a project that employed 130,000 people, that had cost $2 billion, that was being built in a city that didn't appear on any American map, that nobody mentioned. Not that night, because nobody had ever told the vice president. And now the vice president was the president. And the most powerful weapon in the history of human civilization was almost ready. This is the story of the mission that was so secret, even the president didn't know. Within hours of learning FDR is dead, Harry Truman is sworn in. The cabinet watches. He is handed codes, protocols, the chain of command. He has to make a choice in that moment. Project confidence, or admit he knows almost nothing about what is actually happening beneath the surface of this war. He projects confidence. He smiles. He shakes hands. He tells them he will need their help. That choice, to perform certainty he doesn't have, will follow him for the next 4 months. Let's go back. Back before the phone call and Eleanor Roosevelt's hand on a man's shoulder. Back to where this actually began. August 1939. A physicist named Leo Szilard is sitting in a house in Long Island, New York. He is trying to write a letter. It is the most important letter he will ever write, and he knows it. Szilard is a Hungarian refugee, a man who fled Nazi Germany in 1933 and watched what was happening in Europe from the other side of the ocean with the specific, unbearable dread of someone who understands nuclear physics. He knows something that almost no one else knows. He knows that uranium can be split. He knows that when you split it, it releases energy. And he is almost certain, that Germany knows this too. The letter is addressed to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Szilard has persuaded a more famous scientist to sign it, so that Roosevelt will actually read it. That scientist is Albert Einstein. The letter warns that Germany may be building a new kind of bomb, a bomb powered by nuclear fission, a bomb that could, the letter says, be used to destroy an entire port and the surrounding territory. Roosevelt reads it. He creates a small advisory committee. He gives it almost no money, almost no urgency. For 2 years, the American nuclear program is a handful of scientists meeting in borrowed rooms, working on borrowed time. Then comes Pearl Harbor, and everything changes. By 1942, the atomic program has a new name, the Manhattan Project, and a new character. It is no longer a research program. It is a military operation, and the man running it is not a scientist. His name is General Leslie Groves. Groves is 46 years old, heavy-set, brilliant, and deeply difficult to work with. He has just finished overseeing the construction of the Pentagon, the largest office building in the world, built in 16 months. Roosevelt looks at what Groves did with concrete and steel and decides, give this man uranium. Groves accepts the assignment on one condition. He gets to run it his way, and his way is total control. Groves builds what amounts to a country inside a country. He has his own procurement network, invisible to normal military channels. He has his own security apparatus, thousands of intelligence officers whose only job is keeping the project secret. He has his own chain of command that bypasses normal oversight. He reports to the Secretary of War. But in practice, in the day-to-day reality of how the Manhattan Project operates, Groves reports to no one. He hires who he wants. He classifies what he wants. He decides what the president knows, what the cabinet knows, what the army knows. And he decides, very deliberately, what the Vice President of the United States knows, which is nothing. Here is the detail that should bother you. In 1943, a U.S. Senator from Missouri is running an investigation into wasteful military spending. He has discovered strange, enormous expenditures at military sites in Tennessee and in the state of Washington. Hundreds of millions of dollars going to construction projects with no clear purpose. Massive facilities being built in the middle of nowhere, staffed by tens of thousands of workers who seem to be doing. What exactly? The senator dispatches investigators. They go to the sites. They are turned away at the gates. The senator's name is Harry S. Truman, and when he pushes harder, when he makes clear he intends to subpoena records and demand answers, he gets a phone call from the White House, from Franklin Roosevelt personally. Roosevelt tells him, leave it alone, Harry. And Truman, being the kind of man he is, a man who understands loyalty, a man who still believes in the chain of command, backs down. He tells his investigators to stand down. He files the reports away. He walks away from the one secret that will define his entire presidency. He will not understand why for another 2 years. Let me tell you about Oak Ridge, Tennessee. In 1942, the U.S. Army purchased 59,000 acres of farmland in the hills of eastern Tennessee. They didn't ask. They told the families living there, about 1,000 families, that they had a few weeks to leave. Most of them had no idea why. One farmer described the Army officer who came to his door as polite, professional, and completely unmoved. He handed over an envelope with a check inside. He said, "You have 6 weeks." The farmer asked why. The officer said, "I'm not at liberty to say." Within 18 months, they had built a city. Not a base, not a facility, a city, 75,000 residents. Homes, schools, a hospital, a movie theater, a bowling alley, grocery stores, a bus system. And it didn't appear on any map. You could not mail a letter to Oak Ridge. There was no address. If you worked there and someone asked where you lived, you said, Box 83, Knoxville. That was it. That was all you gave. Oak Ridge was not alone. Hanford, Washington, another secret city built almost overnight in the desert, producing plutonium for the second bomb design. Los Alamos, New Mexico, a mesa in the mountains, accessible by a single dirt road, where the scientists lived and worked and were not allowed to leave without permission. Their mail was read. Their phone calls were monitored. Their children were born at the facility, and on their birth certificates, the address was listed as a post office box. These people, scientists, engineers, soldiers, secretaries, cafeteria workers, lived inside the secret. Most of them didn't know the full shape of it. They knew their piece, their task, their needle on a gauge. The rest was classified above their clearance. The women who worked in the main processing facility, the calitron operators, sat at long rows of panels, watching meters, turning dials, adjusting controls. They were told exactly what to do. They were told to keep the needles in certain ranges. They were told not to discuss what they were working on with anyone, including each other. They didn't know they were enriching uranium. They didn't know what uranium was. One woman, interviewed decades later, described her job this way. We were good soldiers. We did what we were told, and we didn't ask questions. We thought it was helping the war effort. We didn't know it was helping to end the world. 130,000 people, living in secret cities, working on machines they didn't understand, building something they would only learn about the same way the rest of the world did, on the radio. On a Tuesday morning in August, Truman knew none of it. April 25, 1945. 13 days into his presidency, Harry Truman finally gets the full briefing. Secretary of War Henry Stimson and General Leslie Groves sit down with him. They have prepared documents. They have photographs. They have projections. For 45 minutes, they explain to the President of the United States what the United States has been building. Truman listens in near silence. The bomb will work. Almost certainly. The science is sound. The engineering is complete. A test is being planned, a full-scale detonation in the New Mexico desert within weeks. 2 operational bombs are already being prepared. They are being built for use against Japan. The delivery systems are in place. The target cities are being selected. The President of the United States is told all of this 13 days after he became president. But here's what he doesn't know. He doesn't know that Groves has curated the briefing document. He doesn't know that certain scientific dissent has been left out. He doesn't know about the casualty projections, because those haven't been finalized yet, and when they are, they will be shaped by the people who want the bomb used. He doesn't know that Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant, complicated man who leads the scientific effort at Los Alamos, has been under Army security surveillance since before the project began. Oppenheimer had communist associations in the 1930s. He attended meetings. He had friends, lovers, a brother who were members of the party. Groves knew this when he hired him. He decided the man's genius was worth the risk. He decided without asking anyone above him. He decided and classified the decision. When Stimson and Groves sit across from Truman in that room on April 25th, they give him the version of the Manhattan Project they want him to have. Clean, confident, inevitable. They do not give him the version where the scientific director is a security risk. They do not give him the version where 3 separate spies have already breached the facility. They do not give him the version where 60,000 civilians were displaced from their homes without explanation. They give him the version where the bomb works and Japan loses and the war ends. That version is true. It is also incomplete. And he doesn't know about the agreement, the Quebec Agreement. In August 1943, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill met in Quebec, Canada, and signed a document. A secret document. It bound the United States and Great Britain together on the atomic bomb. It required that neither country use the bomb against the other. And it required, this is the part that should make your stomach drop, it required that the bomb could not be used against any other country without the mutual consent of both nations. Churchill had veto power over the American atomic bomb. Congress didn't vote on this. The Senate never ratified it. The American people never knew it existed. And Harry Truman, sitting in that room on April 25th, listening to Groves and Stimson explain the weapon he now commanded, is learning for the first time that his predecessor made a binding secret agreement with a foreign head of state about the most powerful weapon in human history. He had no say in the agreement. He has to live by it anyway. He nods. He thanks them. He tells them to keep him informed. He is the most powerful man in the world, and he has almost no control over anything that is about to happen. Truman could push back. He could demand to renegotiate the Quebec Agreement. He could insist on a direct line to the scientists. He could slow things down, ask harder questions, demand to see the dissenting voices. He has the authority to do all of it. He doesn't. The war is still on. Men are dying in the Pacific every day. He accepts the briefing as it was given to him. He trusts the men in the room. He shouldn't have trusted all of them. There is something else Truman doesn't know. Something that none of them in that room know. Something that, if they had known it, would have changed everything. His name is Klaus Fuchs. Fuchs is a British physicist, born in Germany, a refugee from the Nazi regime who fled in 1933, the same year Hitler came to power. He is mild-mannered, brilliant, soft-spoken. He has been working at Los Alamos since 1944. He attends the same meetings as Oppenheimer. He has access to the bomb's core design, the implosion mechanism, the triggering system, the yield calculations. He is also a Soviet spy. Since 1944, Fuchs has been passing classified material to a Soviet handler named Harry Gold, who meets him in ordinary locations, a street corner in Cambridge, a park bench in New York. Fuchs hands over documents. Gold takes him to Moscow. The Soviets photograph them, analyze them, incorporate them. By the time Truman receives his briefing in April 1945, Moscow has had the bomb's core design for nearly a year. And Fuchs is not alone. David Greenglass is an American machinist working at Los Alamos. His brother-in-law is Julius Rosenberg. Greenglass passes detailed lens mold schematics, critical components of the implosion design, to Rosenberg, who passes them to the Soviets. Theodore Hall, the youngest physicist on the project, 19 years old, is operating on his own conscience, convinced that American monopoly on atomic weapons would be more dangerous than Soviet access. He contacts Soviet intelligence independently. He passes what he knows. The Manhattan Project is the most thoroughly penetrated intelligence operation in American history, and nobody knows. Army security has its suspicions. There are anomalies in the data. There are behavioral red flags. Investigations begin, and then, under pressure from Groves not to disrupt the project's momentum, the investigations are quietly paused. The bomb matters more than the breach. That choice, made by unnamed officers in unnamed offices, will shape the Cold War for the next 40 years. The enemy already has what Truman is only just learning about. The secret the United States has spent $2 billion and 130,000 lives to protect has already been given away by people working inside the walls. And the man who now commands the bomb has no idea. July 16th, 1945, 5:29 in the morning. The Jornada del Muerto Desert, New Mexico. The name translates, roughly, as Journey of the Dead. The Trinity test. A device the size of a small car, perched on top of a 100-foot steel tower, is detonated. The yield is 18 kilotons, larger than most of the project scientists predicted. The fireball expands to a diameter of 600 meters in the first second. The shock wave is felt 200 miles away. The mushroom cloud reaches 38,000 feet. Robert Oppenheimer watches the fireball from a bunker 10 miles away. Later, he will describe what came to his mind in that moment. A line from Hindu scripture from the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director who spent 3 years of his life making this moment happen, turns to Oppenheimer. He says, "Now we are all sons of bitches." A coded telegram is prepared and sent. It travels from New Mexico to Potsdam, Germany, where President Harry Truman is meeting with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin to negotiate the shape of the post-war world. The telegram reads, Doctor has just returned most enthusiastic and confident that the little boy is as husky as his big brother. Truman receives it at the negotiating table. He reads it. He folds it. He puts it in his jacket pocket. He says nothing to the men sitting across from him. He returns to the business of redrawing Europe. 3 days later, on July 24th, Truman approaches Stalin at the end of a session. Casually, as if in passing, he tells Stalin that the United States has developed a new weapon, one of unusual destructive force. He watches Stalin's face. Stalin nods. His expression doesn't change. He says he is glad to hear it, and he hopes the Americans make good use of it. Truman walks back to Churchill. He tells him that Stalin didn't seem to understand the significance, probably didn't grasp what he was being told. Churchill says nothing, what neither man knows. That evening, Stalin returns to his quarters and places a phone call to his chief weapons scientist, Igor Kurchatov. He tells him, "Speed things up." Truman thought he was revealing a secret. Stalin was performing ignorance, the most consequential bluff in diplomatic history, and the President of the United States walked right past it. There is a photograph from the Potsdam Conference that historians return to often. Truman, Churchill, and Stalin stand together in the summer sun. 3 men who between them are deciding the shape of the post-war world. They are smiling. They look like men who understand each other, who trust each other, or at least have reached a workable arrangement. What the photograph cannot show, Truman knows there is a bomb and thinks Stalin doesn't. Stalin knows there is a bomb and is pretending he doesn't. Churchill knows that Stalin probably already knows and is saying nothing. The 3 most powerful men in the world are standing together in a photograph, and not one of them is operating with accurate information about what the others know. This is what power looks like at the highest levels. Not clarity, not certainty, a series of managed perceptions and deliberate omissions, all dressed up in formal suits and diplomatic smiles. Meanwhile, the clock is running. The bombs are ready. The target lists have been finalized. Cities have been studied, measured, selected. Hiroshima, Kakura, Nagasaki, Niigata. The Army Air Forces are waiting for the order. Oppenheimer suspects there may be a security leak inside Los Alamos. He raises concerns with Army security. An investigation begins. And then, under pressure from Groves not to disrupt the final stages of the project, it is quietly set aside. Someone chose the bomb over the breach. Truman is never told this happened. He is never told the leak exists. He is never given the chance to decide whether finishing the bomb is worth the cost of giving its secrets to the Soviets. That decision is made for him in a room he was never in. Now we come to the part of this story that most history books skip over, the part about the letter. Leo Szilard, the physicist who wrote the letter that started all of this, the man who convinced Einstein to warn Roosevelt, is sitting in his office in Chicago in the summer of 1945. The war in Europe is over. Germany is defeated. The original reason for building the bomb, to beat Germany to it, no longer exists. And Szilard is afraid. He has seen what the bomb can do. He has studied the projected blast radius, the thermal pulse, the radiation effects. He has run the numbers. He knows what a bomb dropped on a city means, not in abstract military terms, but in human ones. Bodies, shadows burned into walls. A city turned to ash in the time it takes to draw a breath. He writes a petition. The petition argues that using the atomic bomb on a Japanese city, without first warning Japan, without first offering terms, without first demonstrating the weapon's power in an uninhabited area, is a moral and strategic catastrophe. It argues that the United States will poison its own standing in the post-war world, that the very dominance it is trying to assert will become the thing that destroys it. He circulates the petition through Los Alamos and the other project sites. quietly, carefully. 68 scientists sign it. 68 of the people who built the bomb, who spent years of their lives making this thing possible, sign a document pleading with the president not to use it the way it is being planned. Szilard addresses the petition to the President of the United States. He submits it through proper military channels. General Leslie Groves receives it. He reads it. He marks it classified. He files it. Harry Truman never receives it. He never knows it exists. He never knows that the men who built the weapon were trying, from inside the machine, to stop him. The scientists who signed it never find out it was buried. Many of them spend years, decades, believing that Truman read their arguments and chose power over conscience. The real answer is worse. He never had the chance. July 25, 1945. Truman writes in his private diary, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. It may be the fire destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley era after Noah and his Arkansas. It seems to be the most terrible thing ever discovered, but it can be made the most useful." And then, a few lines later, "This weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. He sounds certain. Reading his diary, he sounds like a man who has weighed the options and made a clear-eyed decision. But what options did he actually weigh? He was given casualty estimates for a land invasion of Japan, numbers that range from 250,000 to over 1 million American deaths. These numbers were contested among his own advisors. Some historians believe they were deliberately inflated to justify the bomb. Truman accepted them. He was told that Japan would not surrender unconditionally. American intelligence had intercepted signals from the Japanese government in the summer of 1945, suggesting that Japan was quietly seeking peace terms, primarily around preserving the emperor's role. Truman's Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, believed these signals were significant. Whether Truman was fully briefed on their implications before his decision remains, to this day, historically contested. He never saw Szilard's petition. He did not know about the Soviet penetration of Los Alamos. He was bound by a secret treaty he had not signed, negotiated by a president who had not trusted him enough to mention it while he was still alive. Harry Truman made what he believed was a fully informed decision. He wasn't given the chance. August 6, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. Hiroshima, Japan. A bomb called Little Boy is released from a B-29 bomber at an altitude of 31,000 feet. It falls for 44 seconds. It detonates at 1,900 feet above the city center. Between 70,000 and 80,000 people die instantly. The thermal pulse, the blast wave, the firestorm that follows. By the end of 1945, the death toll will reach 140,000. Radiation sickness, burns, injuries that cannot be treated because the hospitals are gone. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another bomb, another city, 80,000 more dead. Japan surrenders. The war is over. The bomb ended one war, and quietly, invisibly, it started another. The Soviet scientists, working from blueprints that Klaus, Fuchs, and David Greenglass had smuggled out of Los Alamos, tested their own atomic bomb in August 1949, 4 years after Hiroshima, years ahead of what American intelligence predicted was possible. The arms race that would hold the entire world at the edge of annihilation for the next 4 decades had begun. And it had begun in part because the men who guarded the Manhattan Project chose to manage the leak rather than stop it. Truman announces the bombing to the world. He sounds resolute. He says it was necessary. He says it saved lives, American lives, Japanese lives, lives that would have been lost in the invasion. He will say that for the rest of his life. In public, he never expresses doubt. In private, it is different. In letters to his sister, Mary, In diary entries he never intended anyone to read. In the things he says in small rooms, to people he trusts. A different Truman appears. A man who keeps returning to the moment. Who keeps asking whether other paths were real. A man who carries it. Henry Stimson resigns as Secretary of War in September 1945. He writes a long memo before he leaves, arguing that the United States should share atomic knowledge with the Soviet Union, that the arms race that is clearly beginning will be more dangerous than any policy of openness. Truman receives the memo. He does not act on it. The Cold War accelerates exactly as Stimson predicted. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who led the scientific effort and watched the fireball from the bunker in New Mexico, gives an interview in November 1945. He says, "The physicists have known sin." He is not speaking metaphorically. He spends the rest of his career trying to shape nuclear policy, trying to prevent the hydrogen bomb, trying to give the world he helped create some chance of surviving what he helped invent. In 1954, the government revokes his security clearance, accusing him of past communist associations, the same associations Groves knew about in 1942 when he hired him. The man who built the bomb is deemed a security risk by the country that used it. The scientists who signed Szilard's petition find out, eventually, that their letter was buried. Some of them spend the rest of their careers believing that Truman received their arguments and chose power over conscience. The real answer is stranger, and in some ways darker. He never got to choose, because the men who controlled the information decided, for him, without him, what he would be allowed to know. Here is what I want you to sit with. The Manhattan Project is remembered as a triumph, a miracle of science and logistics and Allied cooperation, a collaboration between the United States, Britain, and Canada that produced the weapon that ended the deadliest war in human history. And it was all of those things, but it was also something else. It was a demonstration of what happens when a democracy builds a secret so large that the secret starts making decisions on behalf of the democracy. When the people who control the information become, in practice, the people who control the outcomes. Congress never voted on the Manhattan Project. They funded it without knowing what they were funding. The American people never knew. The vice president, the man one heartbeat from the presidency, was actively kept in the dark by the sitting president. And when that vice president became president, suddenly, without warning, without preparation, he inherited a weapon, a treaty, a moral crisis, and a set of decisions that had already been made for him. He was handed the bill for choices he didn't make, by people who were no longer alive to answer for them. Groves filed the petition. Generals shaped the casualty numbers. FDR signed the secret treaty. And Harry Truman, the failed haberdasher from Missouri, the man who believed in plain speaking and honest dealing, was left to explain to the world, for the rest of his days, a decision that was built on a foundation he was never allowed to inspect. That is not a comfortable thing to think about, but it is the truth. Harry Truman died on December 26, 1972. He was 88 years old. He died in a Kansas City hospital with his family around him. He never publicly expressed regret about Hiroshima. But in one of his last recorded interviews, a quiet conversation, not a press conference, not a formal statement, a reporter asked him something unusual. Not whether the bomb was the right decision. Not whether he would do it again. The reporter asked him whether he ever thought about the people on the ground. The scientists, the ones who built it, the ones who try to stop it. Truman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think about all of it. I think about all of it." The man who failed at selling hats, who was kept in the dark by his own president, who inherited a secret empire built by 130,000 people in cities that didn't exist on any map, who had 105 days to understand nuclear physics, international law, military ethics, and the price of being wrong. Who made a decision, the most consequential decision of the 20th century, with information that had been curated, shaped, and filtered by people who answered to no one? He thought about all of it. The question, the one that doesn't have a clean answer, is whether any of it would have gone differently if Harry Truman had simply been told the truth from the beginning. If FDR had trusted him. If Groves hadn't buried the petition. If the men inside Los Alamos had been able to speak directly to the man who would bear the weight of what they built. We will never know, and that, in the end, may be the darkest thing about this story. Not the bomb, not the death toll, not the Cold War that followed, or the arms race, or the decades of living under the shadow of mutual assured destruction. The darkest thing is this. The most important decision of the modern age was made by a man who wasn't given the chance to make it fully. And nobody, not then, not in the decades that followed, was ever held accountable for that. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who thinks they already know how World War II ended. They don't know the half of it. And if you want to go deeper, we'll be back next week. Take care of yourselves.